Today, I'm a fan of entrepreneurship, and I think that entrepreneurs beat great executive big time. This is about execution, and we do the strategy when we go to the restaurant and we have like 5 minutes. That's when you do strategy. So strategy happens all the time. You're thinking about your business. Every single act that you do, you wake up, you go for a run, you're eating, you're talking to someone in an event. You're always thinking about the company. You're always strategizing in your mind. The freedom of going to a different country where nobody knows you, you can fail and nobody's gonna judge you so much. Let's move to Brazil. It's a huge country. It has this big problem of financial services with very high rates, very inefficient, and the mobile penetration is still very, very, very low. Jump into the country and wants to embrace the whole culture and wants to embrace the ecosystem. You need to be embedded into the ecosystem. Otherwise, you're not going to make it. It's too big. It's about fighting stupidity. It's about fighting bureaucracy. It's about fighting inefficiency. It's about fighting all the bad things and trying to build companies that create not wealth, but well-being. It's about creating that richness of society and this belief that there's a path for everyone to become a better person, better human, and so on.
Hola a todos, bienvenidos a un nuevo capítulo del podcast de K-Fan. Este episodio es posible gracias al apoyo de Google, un aliado fundamental para el ecosistema de las startups en España gracias a Google Cloud. Además de ser partner de K-Fan, Google Cloud también colabora con muchas de nuestras startups participadas. Por eso, hoy queremos compartir con vosotros muchas de las iniciativas que estamos desarrollando de forma conjunta, como por ejemplo el impulso de la innovación con inteligencia artificial. Google Cloud está ayudando a las startups a desarrollar productos y aplicaciones de inteligencia artificial de vanguardia utilizando Gemini y el resto de sus servicios. Estos servicios garantizan el cumplimiento de la normativa europea en materia de residencia de datos. ¿Qué significa esto? Que los datos de las startups están seguros y que además no son utilizados por Google para entrenar sus propios modelos. Además, Google pone a disposición de las startups su marketplace como canal de ventas internacional que les permite llegar a clientes de todo el mundo y de esta forma acelerar su ciclo de ventas. Del mismo modo, el Google for Startups Campus Madrid se ha destacado como un espacio exclusivo donde incubar los proyectos más disruptores, desde donde se llevan a cabo los programas de Google for Startups, experiencias de 3 meses diseñadas para compañías que utilizan IA para innovar de manera responsable en sectores como la salud, la ciberseguridad o la educación. Las compañías también pueden disfrutar de créditos en la nube. Las startups en fase inicial pueden optar hasta 2.000 euros. En el caso de empresas que hayan cerrado su primera ronda de financiación, esta cifra puede alcanzar los 250.000 euros. Por último, las startups que desarrollen proyectos con IA alcanzarán los 350.000 euros en créditos. Si eres una startup que busca impulsar su crecimiento, no dudes en explorar las oportunidades que te ofrece Google Cloud. Y ahora os dejo con el último capítulo del podcast de K-Fan.
Good morning, everyone. I'm here with Gus. How are you, Gus?
Good morning, good morning. Pleasure to be here.
Ready for Carnival?
Oh, getting there.
Getting there? Who's our guest today, Gus?
Our guest today is a dear friend and also an advisor for one of our funds. He's a Spaniard who truly made it in Brazil, and truly, and is now back in Spain. We have Sergio Furio here.
How are you, Sergio?
Hi guys, thank you for hosting.
No worries. Thank you for making the time. So Sergio, we like to start usually with the personal side of people and of guests. Tell us a bit about your background. Where were you born? Where did you grow up? What did you study, and how did that end up in the professional world?
Yeah, so Jaime, I was born and raised in Sagunto, Valencia, a small town, like 20,000 population. Spent my childhood in Sagunto until I was 14. My family decided to move to Barcelona, the large city at that point. So my young years were in Barcelona. I went to university studied business, and that was between 1995 and 2000. So I graduated in 2000 in business in ESADE, and that's where I started my professional career.
Is it a family of entrepreneurs, or are you the only one?
Not at all. I think that the only reference probably that I had as an entrepreneur at that point was my grandfather. Besides working in a company as an employee, he also used to be a farmer. orange trees in Valencia. So I think that was the only entrepreneurial experience that I was seeing. Buying stuff, putting into the fields, producing oranges, and then selling them, and making sure that you charge a markup for that, and all the volatility of the orange prices. How do you manage that? How do you prefix that? Yeah, that was the only reference, so not like a serious entrepreneurial family. Yeah, but very hardworking. I think that would be the best way of describing them.
And what was it like moving from such a small city, from Sagunto to a big city? Also in the context, I mean, you were telling us before we hit recording that you have just moved to Madrid with the whole family from Sao Paulo. So any impact there for you as a teenager, actually?
I lived in New York also.
Yeah. So that first change, when I was 14, I remember my parents telling me, "Kid, we're gonna be moving to Barcelona." The whole world collapsed. To me, I literally was crying. My mother still reminds me about that moment, and because it was like such a comfortable life. If you want people that you know for many years, small town, you walk all around. Not as today that parents don't allow kids to walk on the street, but in that point, that was very straightforward. All my friends were preparing for high school, and everyone knew what the future was going to look like because they had seen like the older kids to be doing that. And then suddenly for me, like the unknown. Yeah, so it was a lot of stress. It's a moment in your life that you really don't want unknowns. You want everything that is like clear in front of you, and I didn't have that. In retrospect, when I arrived to Barcelona, I was afraid. I never was like at that point an alpha personality at all. Sort of like humble, really insecure to a certain point, and probably it took me like a year, maybe two, to get to know some people there in the high school in Barcelona, and just understanding that the city is bigger. Everyone looks like they are smarter until a certain point in which you realize that all of us, we are human beings. We're just trying to learn and to do our own good. But it was that movement from Sagunto to Barcelona for me was it was obviously like a big jump on the personality side. Having to battle in the early days on that type of changes, obviously in retrospect is nothing, but it was important for me. I mean, just to push yourself and try to win some friends and put some medals of honor in front of everyone. I mean, that type of competitiveness, I think it's good to have in those early years. And then I spent between 1992, which is when I arrived to Barcelona, until 2008. That was 16 years that I spent my time in Barcelona. It's a city that saw me like moving from high school to college, then graduating from college and moving into my first job. When I was graduating from college, I did my first experience of living abroad seriously. As Gustavo was mentioning, that was my first trip to New York. And that was 1999. I remember it was obviously a very exciting time. In Spain, probably the closest thing to the tech ecosystem that we were seeing was Terra. And more, you were seeing it more as a stock in the stock exchange more than an actual business, probably. But that moment in which I went to New York, spent those 6 months or so studying, meeting people, it was again eye-opening. Sort of like the moment that you say, okay, I want to live here. This really makes like a ton of sense. It's like seeing the future to a certain point. You were walking into every single space. Internet was all around. The students of the MBA course, where all of them were saying, I want to launch a business. But I was not in that mood at all. I was more, I'm going to go back when I go back to Spain to marketing, which is what I wanted, or I'm going to move into banking or consulting. I think that was the aspiration at that point. Yeah. So when I moved back from New York to back to Barcelona to finish the undergrad, I took the decision of, after spending like some months in marketing in Danone, doing advertising in more than number crunching, I said I need more numbers. So that's why I took the decision of starting the career in investment banking rather than marketing.
And how transformative were your peers in New York? Living in the US, getting to know this culture of startups, of founding companies, more entrepreneurial, not less big companies, but more startups in general.
I think that for that you will need to fast forward to my second phase in New York that we can definitely touch on a second. That was from 2008 to 2012, because in that 99, yes, there was like a lot of noise about the .com, a lot of companies, meaning whatever idea you could put like a .com on that, and I flirted away the idea of. Actually, my thesis was supposed to be about e-commerce. I remember going back to the professor that was going to be coaching me for the thesis. And I came back from New York and said, I need to do something on e-commerce. I mean, I really want to get into it. And then the professor told me, there's nothing in e-commerce. It's just like a retailer with a website. And so he convinced me not to go deeper into e-commerce. And instead of that, I ended up doing as my thesis, marketing for sports company, which obviously it was a waste of time, probably. And I should have gone the e-commerce route because Amazon was just being created at that point, if you think about it. So I don't think that at that point, Gustavo, to be honest, was transformative. And now that you're asking, it's interesting because the whole internet was being created at that point. The first era, and it passed in front of me, and I didn't benefit from it. I was probably like too much focused on what is success back in Spain, and success back in Spain was not about building your e-commerce platform or your tech company. Success in Spain was working in investment banking and working in strategy consulting,
and that's what you did, right? What did you do? For the audience that doesn't know?
So after that passage, before graduating in Danone, I decided I wanted more numbers. So I went into investment banking at Deutsche Bank. So I spent there 5 years advising corporate clients in anything from corporate structuring, financing, refinancing, bond issuance, M&A, and the likes. Very exciting times. In Spain at that point, a lot of things were happening. So I benefited definitely from that. Also, it went deeper into derivatives for hedging structures and the like. It's also quite interesting at that point. But by 2005, a bit of the feeling was this is too much of an specialist game in banking, and I want to do something a bit more strategic. So the guys from Boston Consulting Group, I had been interviewing with them right after graduation in 2000, and they declined at that point. They called me one day, what are you doing? I'm doing banking. Whoa, we are super interested in people that are doing banking because we have like a banking practice here. And so I asked, well, but am I going to be doing only banking? No, of course not. You're going to be doing all type of companies so that you gain like a strategic approach to everything. So I decided to move to BCG, and I spent 8 years doing banking. But from the consulting side, which was also very entertaining and eye-opening, if you want.
Was it worth it? Because I'm asking the question in the context of, I mean, there's sometimes these conversations or these discussions in the ecosystem / tech world of, well, consultants only give you advice, but they don't execute. It's not worth it, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff.
There's beauty of facing problems as a co-pilot. There are benefits on that. You're learning. You can make many mistakes. But you can focus on the intellectual challenge more than on the tactical one. So the intellectual challenge is quite interesting, and I think it's needed. Someone needs to focus on that. It is true that in retrospect, some of the things that you were doing were not applicable, but still, going deeper into that type of problems is, I think, that created a framework in myself and in the consulting world in general. I think that the framework to solve problems comes to you with life. So I'm very grateful for that period. Yeah. You strengthen your analytical skills, you create rationality approaches, frameworks that help you in navigating through uncertainty. You face a white piece of paper to build something. When someone has a problem, where do you start with? So I think it's a very, very, very valuable experience. And even today, when we think about Creditas, a lot of things that we do are based on frameworks and on ways of thinking that we develop or that I developed myself when I was doing either banking or consulting. Yeah. So yes, definitely yes. And by the way, most of the time, and especially these days, consultants are doing more and more line work, getting involved and getting their hands dirty into execution and not only strategy pure, and that's it. I think that the old times of I'm going to be doing a strategic planning for company X for the next 5 years are over, especially because 1 year later, everything goes to the garbage and you need to start again. So the learning, the learning cycle has get closer and closer in large organizations as well, which puts more pressure on those type of profiles to be constantly reinventing themselves. So I have, obviously, today I'm a fan of entrepreneurship, and I think that entrepreneurs beat great executive big time because of the skin in the game that they have, the passion, and a bunch of things. But I would never underestimate the power of a large organization, in a consultant team, and people that are like analytical in nature and so on.
But there's a saying in startup land that after you found the startup, and pre-founding startups is more intellectual than execution, of course. But after you found it, it's more hard than it is smart. I mean, it's less of it becomes less and less of an intellectual challenge and more of an endurance, resilience, mental health, and solving problems in a systematic way than being intellectually challenged all the time. Would you agree with that?
So today in Creditas, I always tell people that this is about execution, and we do the strategy when we go to the restaurant and we have like 5 minutes. That's when you do strategy. So try happen all the time. You're thinking about your business. Every single act that you do, you wake up, you go for a run, you're eating, you're talking to someone in an event, you're always thinking about the company, you're always strategizing in your mind. That doesn't mean that you sit in front of a PowerPoint and develop like a very clear and fancy slide. Eventually, you need to build that slide. And then suddenly everything comes to your mind. You connect the dots, and suddenly an amazing framework comes alive. And people look at you and say, wow. I said,
where did that come from?
Oh, yeah. And this is like the Picasso story, right? So you just ask Picasso to draw a picture, and it charges you like $1 million and say, dude, it took you like 1 minute. Yeah, well, and what about the years and years that I've been working hard so that all the things come to mind and come alive in just 5 minutes? So I think that's the learning. I think it's in consulting, it was more about work so that you can create a framework. In entrepreneurship, is work so that you execute, and eventually the framework comes to your mind. It's true that there are like certain entrepreneurs that end up being very strategic and not that much executioners. And there are other entrepreneurs in the other extreme that are very executioner, not strategic at all. Obviously, the sweet spot of both, it would be desirable. In my case, I tend to be very, very, very execution oriented, very KPIs, very metrics oriented. And then the strategy comes in certain moments when you just develop and reflect on the past and think about the future. But it's not, at least I don't consider that my function today. We're making like a big jump here. But I think it would be great to touch on the New York second phase while I was still in BCG, if you guys agree.
Yeah, I mean, I may be reading this wrong, but I was doing the research for the podcast, and you lived in New York from 99 to 2000, and then from 2009 to 2012. And I mean, looking now that Creditas sits in the intersection between finance and tech, 99 to 2000, it was, an intense hype moment because it was just pre-bubble bursting. Bubble burst, I believe, in March 2000, and you left before then. So, I mean, it was everybody excited about tech and everything, and you were just mentioning that although you were not exactly focused in that, you lived through that. Whereas 2009 to 2012 in New York, working at BCG with finance, you were just after the big crash. 2008 had just happened. Everybody was collecting their dust there. Having said that, in tech, iPhone had just been released. All these new mobile and geolocation based startups were being founded. I think primary VC in New York was founded in 2012, but it was beginning to happen in New York, the VC world. And you were living through all that. And then you, out of a sudden, you decide to found a startup and come to Brazil. So I was thinking how transformative this period in New York was to make a Spaniard living in New York, working at a big consulting firm in an interesting, a successful department, to jump ship and come to Brazil to found to found a startup in a country that at the time, I don't know, like 5 other people founded startups only.
Yeah. I moved to New York in 2008. It was November 2008. So the dust was coming out from the city, so everything was collapsing. Actually, I moved to New York because there was so much demand for talent in the early 2008 that it was very easy for me to apply. I was not super smart, but I was like inside of BCG. Do you want to come to New York? Yes, definitely. Yeah, let's go to New York. And then when I arrived there were barely some projects. I mean, they were like a big hole in 2008, 2009. The city was sort of like trying to recover from that party. And so that was a very different environment than the one in 1999, before the bubble burst. Those years, I think the beauty of New York, similarly to Sao Paulo, to a certain point, is the vibe, is what you see on the street, is the energy of the ecosystem. And when I'm saying Sao Paulo today, not Sao Paulo at that point. But I mean, that passion of everyone, the feeling that the power is in your hands, the miracle of entrepreneurial spirits. I mean, all those things, you see them alive. But remember that phase, 08, 09, 10, there was a lot of skepticism on everything, just because the banks had been collapsing like crazy. So everything that sounded financial innovation was like a house of cards. What do you mean financial innovation? And so everyone was like trying to heal from that phase and going through the hangover from the party. And I remember when the first time that I seriously started like thinking about entrepreneurs, about an entrepreneurial career, was when I wrote the first check for a very good friend, still today, Pau Sabria, Spanish. He was a consultant at BCG with me, went for the MBA in Colombia right when I was arriving to New York. So strengthened our relationship. And then when he was finishing the MBA, I said, great, Pau, so just stay in New York and you come with me to this project that I'm doing, this technology transformation inside of BCG. And then he tells me, no, I'm going to be starting a business. And he says, starting a what? What do you mean? Yeah, it's a business. It's going to be about pictures on weddings, and we're going to put them, crowdsourcing those pictures. And then he built Olapic with another 2 Spaniard friends from the MBA. And they say, we're going to do a round. So yes, I mean, I have like my bonus here from BCG. So here you have like $50,000. So then
so you invested, Sergio, as an
angel? I was first. Yeah. So the first checks were Pablo Fernandez, that ended up like he was in Santander at that point. So he had left PCG, moved to Santander, and later went on to found Clickars. Myself, and I think I was like a University of New York. I think at Columbia was also putting a check or like an entrepreneurial program or something like that. So that was like the first checks of these guys, and that first check that I placed on a company, that was 2010, I think it was, or 2009. Yeah, it allowed me to, be closer to Pau. Pau started like explaining me about, all the problems of building a business and how to scale it and all those things. And by 2011, I started like doing some tests myself on can I build something myself? And then in mid 21 to late 21, the idea of becoming an entrepreneur had become a reality in my mind. I want to do this. And since I had always been working in banking, banking had to be. It was like where I had all my experience and so on. So I started like doing some research, looking at what the trends were. And yeah, there were like some companies doing fintech, some relatively big companies. And I started like asking to my friends from some partners from BCG, what do you think about Company X? And the reference at that point in financial services, in fintech, that was fintech 1.0 in the US was Bankrate. Bankrate in the US and Money Supermarket in UK. Those were the two companies. That was price comparison sites. It was like a first layer of technology, just supposed to be a user interface to connect with a deeper experience with the banks, but not trying to disrupt the banks, just trying to partner with the banks. And I asked to those colleagues from BCG, and everyone said, no way. There's no way that disruption can happen in financial services. Yeah, it's a regulated entities. It's a huge thing. You require capital. How someone is going to be, blah, blah, blah. These things are just going to be marketing tools to support the industry. Similarly to the TV, you're going to be doing that on the web, and that's it. And so I said, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Because you just believe people, right? So at a certain point, you say, well, if everyone is thinking in that way. But the mental process at that point was, okay, even if it's just like a small and tiny layer, I just want to do it. I'm 33, 34. I just need to do it now. If I don't do it, I was 32. If I don't do it now, it's never going to be happening. So
it beat you. The culture and the talks and everything that was happening in your friends group beat you. Was that?
Yeah. I think you were seeing the passion in the eyes of Pau. I think that was interesting to see. I had already proved to myself that I could be successful in a corporate environment. And I started dating Silvia, my wife. And Silvia was Brazilian. She was working in BCG as well. And when I came to her and say, hey, I'm going to be building a company. What if I build it in Brazil? Because she had told me, I was telling her, the story was, I told her, I'm thinking about building a business, but everything is super smooth in financial services. Everything is a commodity. Everything is very tiny margins and the like. So what am I going to be doing? And then she says, personal loans in Brazil, they charge you 100% APR. So that thing resonated, and I got into the central bank website, started downloading CSV files and going through them, but just in a week of due diligence. So it was not like something very well thought. I went back to Silvia and said, what if I build this type of business, like a Bankrate in Brazil? Yeah, because interest rates are so high, and the reason is because they have the branch network, and the branch network is expensive. And if we build this new channel through a website, it's going to be amazing because we're going to reduce the cost and blah, blah, blah. She was looking at me and said, what the hell is this guy telling me? So I convinced Silvia to move to Brazil. And part of the thing, and maybe this is retrospective rationalization, but part of the thing was the freedom of going to a different country where nobody knows you, that you can fail and nobody's going to judge you so much. versus when you're doing that in your home country with your family around, with your friends around, and things like that. I think that I probably wouldn't have been able to make the jump. So I think that was liberating. Let's move to Brazil. It's a huge country. It has this big problem of financial services with very high rates, very inefficient, and more important, the mobile penetration is still very, very, very low. And that was where that thing that Gustavo was mentioning before about the connection with New York and how the vibe of the environment was so relevant. The iPhone had just been released in 2007. But by 2011, it was very clear that that was going to be a life-changing for everyone in the world. But you were looking at Brazil, and still the smartphone penetration was quite low. And then you were looking at internet penetration, and most of the people in Brazil didn't have access to the internet because the middle class didn't have laptops or computers. And their phones were feature phones. They were not smartphones. So essentially, you didn't have smartphone penetration. They didn't have internet. And then, therefore, everything had to be through the branch network. And you were looking at productivity per branch, and it was extremely low. They had so many branches because it's a low-density country. So you need to have many, many branches to cover that geography. And so that meant that the volume per branch was low, very inefficient. So the idea of launching an internet business in financial services was a no-brainer. I think that it was low penetration, high prices. The reason why the prices are so high is because the production cost is so high because of the branches. And then therefore we will find a way. But the finding the way, that was definitely not nailed down. I just moved to Brazil with the thesis of bank rate of Brazil. So money market of Brazil. And the first thing that I did was obviously I built a pitch. And Pau, my friend from Olympic, introduced me to Fabrice Grinda. Fabrice Grinda from FJ Labs, which had founded OLX in Latin America, made a huge success in Brazil. So I went there. He was living in New York. I was living in New York. Went to his office and made the first pitch that I ever did in my life to Fabrice. And I was going through the slides, huge opportunity, blah, 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 everything that we just discussed. So it's a no-brainer. So Fabrice was just doing, yeah. And I was, dude, this is amazing. Yeah, pitching is great. I love pitching. Then, so when I finished, I was sort of okay, so now how do you close a deal? So what do you do? So Fabrice, what do you think? No, I love it. I completely agree. I mean, this is a strategy. And that's the reason why I invested in Capitalis. I said, what? Capitalis. Capitalis, yeah. So that's when, all my consulting work of doing due diligence and mapping the market, I had done none of that. And there were something like 8 people doing exactly the same, with the same mindset. And so actually Fabrice introduced me to the founder of Capitalis, who was Enrique Linares, another Spaniard. Enrique Linares had moved to Brazil, and he was living in Brazil building Capitalis. So I met Enrique Linares, obviously not an ideal conversation the first time that I met him, because we were going to be competitors. So that was strange times, but I feel a lot of nostalgia because of that. It looked like the prehistory of tech in Sao Paulo, in Brazil. And the ecosystem was very small. Not many VCs, not many entrepreneurs, everyone trying to support each other. A lot of international entrepreneurs moving into the country. The rocket internet guys, putting themselves together into a hotel, building companies that was the modus operandi of that era. And when I arrived to Sao Paulo, I was probably completely lost. It was first-time entrepreneur, no funding, no money, no idea. So I was talking to Pau every couple of weeks, saying, these are my difficulties and blah, blah, blah. So that, and I'm just going to summarize the first year, and then we can take the conversation wherever you guys want. But the first year was probably chaos. Because on one hand, I was pitching to investors, I'm going to build this. And the reaction was, yeah, gringo number 8 that comes to Brazil and wants to build another marketplace for financial services. And we have already put like our chip in company X or company Y, or they're going to be doing this, or they're going to be doing that, or this is not going to work, and blah, blah, blah. And but I was stubborn, and so I was like assembling the team, using my money from the latest bonus from PCG to assemble a team that was 4 developers, 2 journalists to create the content, because a marketplace requires content, and myself. That was the initial team. And
by the way, Sergio, did you ever consider doing it with someone else instead of just doing you alone as a solo founder?
So somehow, yes. I think I was like even so bad at pitching that I didn't convince investors and I didn't convince co-founders either. Because I approached 2 people that Silvia, my wife, introduced me to. Everything was like using Silvia's connections, trying to get to know people in Sao Paulo. That was the story of those first couple of years. So I found one guy that was working in Citibank doing credit cards, and another guy that was working in Apontador, later acquired by Naspers, and in technology. And I tried to convince both, and both told me no. And they ended up being advisors. So yeah, on one side, I didn't convince people to join me in the game. And then after 6 months, I said, look, I mean, I'm just going to be doing this by myself. It's going to be faster. I'm not the type of personality. I'm not very easy when I work in terms of personality. Not the easiest person to work with. So that's the positive side of being a solo founder. You don't need to fight that much with other people. The pain, you live it by yourself. And you need to create a bit of an expertise in knowing about everything. In entrepreneurship, I do think that there's some power in being a generalist, because you have like a better context of everything that you are doing. And sometimes you can take the decisions much faster, which obviously time is money in entrepreneurial land. But just going back to the story, at the end of the day, assemble that team, put them together to work on this marketplace, started shipping the code. Every month there was a release. That was like the fastest releases that we have ever done in Creditas. And in a year, we had like a fully fledged marketplace with a credit cards comparison tool, insurance and personal loan simulators, editorial content that was attracting an audience, and so on. So that was, from a shipping the code perspective, it was great productivity. It was amazing first year. From a business model perspective, what was very clear was that all the concerns from the investors were accurate. It was difficult to convert leads in Latin America, and specifically in Brazil. And then therefore that the monetization was going to be a big problem. And that was if you want, the first conclusions from that first year of work as an entrepreneur.
Just one thing before we start with the Creditas story and everything, but at that time, there were, oddly enough, I mean, people building startups and people building fintechs in Brazil. There were a lot of foreigners. I mean, you were building, and then Henrique was building. You had David from Nubank was starting, Ben Gleason and Gabosu was also there. There were probably lots of Brazilians. But oddly enough, there were a lot of foreigners, and the foreigners also, I mean, they made it big. You guys made it big. Why do you think was that? I mean, there's a saying in Brazil that Brazil is not for beginners, and Brazil is not exactly a country that welcomes foreigners a very easy way. I would say it's fairly the opposite of that. It's a very closed system, very closed society, and all. Why did the foreigners in that segment specifically, or in that time, made it so big? And why were there so many foreigners?
In reality, I think that it was about the lack of Brazilians, more about the presence of foreigners. So what was happening was that the same that was happening in Spain at that time. So success was about becoming an investment banker, a private equity investor, or a strategy consulting, and not an entrepreneur. So in Faria Lima, what everyone wanted to be was a private equity investor, an investment banker, or a strategy consultant. So there was a lack of talent, and entrepreneurship is about talent, about how do you foster an ecosystem. So that part, the raw material for entrepreneurship was missing. Because you didn't have that, you didn't have the capital either. So venture capital, at that point, it was 2-3 funds, and that's it. Not that much local money. Most of the funds were being capitalized by foreigners as well. And then foreigners call foreigners. So foreigners want to meet with entrepreneurs that speak fluent English, that have a global perspective. I think that in reality, it was more about the lack of an attraction for talent for entrepreneurial activities in Brazil. Then you have like another angle, which is in general, I love the idea of a foreigner fully committed to cut the ties with their home country and move to a different country. I love that idea. I think you find the right profile of someone that is willing to give it all to succeed, like the American dream. It is very powerful because cutting your ties with your home country is liberating. You can change your life. It's becoming an actor in a movie. Do whatever you want. Nobody knows you, so you can start from zero. And you can consolidate all that passion. You can be naive, ask stupid questions. And most of the success in reality comes from those stupid questions that nobody dares to ask. But it's a foreigner, obviously. This guy doesn't know. Everyone laughs at you. Why is this guy asking this question? Obviously. And but obviously, when you ask those questions, people react, and then you suddenly start like connecting dots, and then you see the world from a different angle versus the local that obviously they are afraid to fail more. They see the world with the same eyes as everyone else, with the same eyes of the incumbent, and so on. I think that was probably the magic cocktail. And that cohort of companies of 2010, 11, 12, 13, it was very powerful. I mean, you mentioned some of the gringos. It's so Brian from Viva Real, Benjamin Giabolso, David Novan, but you have all the ones, the OPA, all the rocket internet companies. So really like a very vibrant. In insurance brokers, you had 3 different insurance brokers powered by foreigners with exactly the same thesis. So yeah, it's I think it's a good cocktail. The foreigner coming into an emerging market. Now you mentioned that Brazil is not very encouraging for foreigners. I tend to disagree a bit, Gustavo, with that. I think that the locals listen to foreigners. They discount like a bunch of the things that they say because they don't know Brazil and blah, blah, blah. But they respect, I think, that foreigners compared to other geographies. In reality, if I think Spain, Spain in certain aspects, maybe even a more closed culture than Brazil. So I had this complex of Brazilians of we are we don't know that much. Brazil is always going to be the country of the future, but never will be, and blah, blah, blah. That mentality makes them a bit more open in certain circles. Obviously, Faria Lima has its own ecosystem by itself.
How do you compare now? I mean, for a foreigner starting a company in Brazil and in Spain? I mean, both ecosystems fairly well.
So the big problem for Spain is size. I think that if you focus on Spain, you have a size problem. It's too small. 40 million people don't pay you for a $1 million exit unless you really nail it. You need to do everything right. And when you are targeting 200, 300 million population, you can make a lot of mistakes, and we made a lot of mistakes. And you still manage to find a way. I think that the trick in entrepreneurship is selecting a huge market, number one, because then you can adjust the course. And then the second reason why Spain you also struggle a bit is on margin. So things are much more efficient in Spain, similarly to the US. Yeah. And things are very inefficient in Brazil. So that makes it that the margin of my enemy is my margin. Yeah, that builds opportunities. And and that is very exciting. So I think that if I had to start a business in Spain, I would always look at an international approach from day one. And obviously, if you think about it, Latin America, it's a natural territory for expansion of companies built in Spain, or companies built in Portugal as well. Right? So if you consider Iberia, essentially you can tackle the entire South American market through the language, and there are like very strong cultural connections between those countries. In my case, I felt extremely welcomed in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, and I feel that the culture that I have is probably at this point is a mixture between Spain, New York, and Sao Paulo, but it's very close. I mean, we are very similar to Brazilians in the mentality, especially urban Brazilians, people that live in Sao Paulo and the likes. So it really helps you in getting there. Now, the big problem is you cannot be successful in a country by having a great internet connection. You really need to get your foot on the ground. And I spent 12 years there. And most of my friends live there. Everyone knows me in the country at this point. And that's a lot of effort, a lot of events, a lot of interactions, a lot of connections, a lot of friendships. And those things is very, very, very difficult to do it in the distance. So when I found an entrepreneur and say, I'm going to be building a business that is going to be targeting Brazil, because Brazil is a great country, huge country, a lot of margin. I said, great, when are you moving? No, I'm going to be living here because it's more convenient. And that is, I think that is very, very, very complicated. It's, and you could argue that some foreigners say Brazil is for Brazilians. I don't think so. I think that Brazil is for people that wants to jump into the country and wants to embrace the whole culture and wants to embrace the ecosystem. You need to be embedded into the ecosystem. Otherwise, you're not going to make it. It's too big. It's too specific. On every single aspect. You cannot manage it with a great internet connection. But now Spain gives you the access to Europe. So you can build today companies in Madrid that can tackle the entire European market, which is a big enough market. Obviously, the problem is that you have a lot of competition coming from French entrepreneurs and Italian entrepreneurs and UK entrepreneurs and German entrepreneurs and the likes. And that doesn't happen that much in Brazil. So competition, obviously, it's important to look at the incumbent, which is going to be the one that you're going to be trying to defeating. But it's also important to look at the talent competition. And the problem in Europe is that you have so much talent, amazing talent. That is very hard to differentiate yourself. And that creates a bottleneck for great ideas to move them. It's a self-selection as well, if you can think about it. But as an investor, it's also very difficult to differentiate in Europe who's going to be the best project. In Sao Paulo, I find it easier. There's typically going to be one winner team, and that's it. And identifying it, it's much easier.
And what about bridges? Bridges from Brazil to Pan-Latam, from Pan-Latam, from Spam to Brazil, from Brazil to US, from Brazil to Europe, from Europe to Brazil. How do you see all these startups going international? Would you think it's easier go from here to there? I mean, from Brazil to Europe, from there to here, from Europe to here to Brazil, going through Spam?
Yeah, I think it's. I don't think that there's a.
Is it always hard?
I think there's not a size that fit all. So you have examples on one side and on the other. I think that getting into Brazil for a company that has a presence abroad is very, very hard. It's very hard because it's such a big country. The profit pool is so big that the competition is going to be tremendous. So typically, unless you cut the ties with everything else that you're doing and just focus on Brazil, it's just not going to happen. So I think someone from abroad getting from Brazil, it really needs to get full focus of at least one of the founders, hopefully the best one of the two, if there are like two co-founders, that needs to fly into the country and be fully committed. Otherwise, it's not going to happen. You have like great examples of international expansions. So I think the best example of a Brazilian company moving internationally is Cesar from Gympass, WellHub now. It's a reference. I mean, it's what they have done is amazing. They have exported innovation to the rest of the world, and they have done it at scale. So they are like trying to win in the US market. That's serious. And he's proven that it's possible. But obviously, he had to move with his family to the US and become an American. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen. But before that, he stopped by Spain, and then he managed to conquer Spain and then compete head-to-head to the incumbents. So it's very hard. It requires dedication. And then the business model. Is it a model that is a business model that is expandable or not? If you think financial services, much more complicated. Financial services is very local. Regulation is very specific. So in that case, Nubank is trying to do the expansion from Brazil to Colombia and Mexico, and it's difficult. I mean, obviously, the expansion into Mexico is going to cost 100 times more than what they did in Brazil. The competitive environment is different. The prices are more adjusted, not that much margin. There's already people that are trying to replicate what you are doing there. So typically, the way that we, for example, at Creditas are thinking about international expansion is it's a combination of small bets. We did a bet in Mexico, and we want to do it long and thin. It's not a massive investment and try to have overnight success. So we have been already 4 years in the country and counting, and we are not still deploying too much capital because it takes time to do those things. So a combination of those type of small bets and M&A. So M&A is going to be a great opportunity to meet teams that you feel passionate about, that they have discovered certain things that it would take you 2 years, 3 years to discover. And then you can deploy your capabilities into that type of market. But I think that it's always hard. It's unless you are Google, right? So when you have like a completely tech ecosystem or you are Meta, then I think international expansion is a no-brainer in that case.
And when you're more product-centered, I mean, when you have a fantastic product and it's easier to expand internationally, then you are more distribution-centered. And most Brazilian startups or developing countries startups are more distribution-centered. And then you can see the profile of the founders as well, right? I mean, big founders, successful founders in developing countries are much more like our crowd, people coming from financial market, consultants, and so forth. Whereas big successful founders in developed markets are much more technical, much more focused on product and stuff.
Sergio, and to go into a bit more detail about Creditas, explain, I mean, you've been at the company, you founded the company obviously 12 years ago. So explain a bit more where the company is at, what's the current value at, and just in general for the audience, because, I mean, the majority of the listeners that we have are Spaniards, so maybe they don't know the specifics about the company. Explain a bit what Creditas is.
So after a foundation in 2012 as a marketplace for financial services, we realized 3 years later that route was not the right one. It was too thin. And what we did was a vertical expansion. So you took that marketplace and just selected one of the verticals and went all the way down the deeper that you could. It was changing the dynamics. And if you think about it as a marketplace, you're going to be getting a 1% of the transacted volume. And as a vertically integrated platform, you're going to be getting 40% of the transacted value. So it's that type of order of magnitude different. So for us, it was a no-brainer in 2015 to do the pivot on the model, go vertical on one specific vertical that was asset-backed lending. So relatively specific. But when you get into it, obviously, it's a huge opportunity that we're attacking. So what we do is we try to disrupt the banking industry that is mostly providing unsecured lending for the Brazilian consumer at very high rates. What we do is we refinance those expensive debts with much cheaper lending using the assets that those consumers own. And that could be your house, your car, and your salary. Those are the three assets. So 2 assets that are tangible and 1 which is an intangible asset, that is the stream of cash flows that will come from your company over the years. So we do all that in a 99% is a mobile device today, 1% is web, even though the initial Creditas was a fully web type of transaction. But that transformation on the mobile side, on smartphones, obviously happened, and we benefited from that. And in terms of size, today we have 2,000 employees. We have $400 million in revenues, 45% gross profit margin, and profitable today. And essentially, the mentality that we have, the valuation that you asked, the latest time that we did a round was in 2022. So 3 years ago, that was a $4.8 billion valuation. I'm not going to discuss whether that valuation is accurate today or not. All we know is that at the end of the day, it's about like growing the business and building value, tangible value, more than paper money. I think that's what we really focus on today. The way that we are thinking about the business is we have nailed the economics, and that transformation that we did from very high burn to today being profitable has been essential for that. So we today have a business that delivers 40 to 50% gross margins, and then underneath that gross margins, you do 2 things. The cost that you have underneath that gross margin, it's on one side growth, and on the other technology investments. So both are investments. So even though you just break even the company, all the things that you're doing between that 45% gross profit margin and the break even is investing in the future. And that investment in the future is what's going to allow us to grow the business. What we are putting now the company is into 30% annual growth rates, which we believe that at our scale is a decent growth trajectory. It helps you on growing the business 10x over 5-6 years, and we think that that's good enough, at least for the moment.
Now, when you describe it, I mean, it seems obvious that it would be there would be a space to build such a powerhouse in asset-backed lending in Brazil. But I mean, it was probably not that clear at the moment of the incorporation. What were the pivotal moments in Creditas story? Good or bad, or good and bad?
Yeah, there are many bad and not many good, but I will try to summarize there. So 2013 was pivotal because it was the moment that everything was wrong. Investors were not giving you money and so on. And the first pivotal moment was in 2013 when I convinced Alberto Gaidis, that had founded a company called Grana Aqui, which for non-Portuguese speakers translates for money here, which is not a very nice brand probably, but the guy was doing home equity loan leads for mid-sized banks. So we merged that company into what at that point was Bank Fácil, that we ended up rebranding as Creditas. And that was very relevant because that allowed us 2 things. One, to raise funds. We raised $500,000 to survive because I had run out of money. And then number 2, it gave us the vertical for expansion. Home equity, just the lead, was giving us 1.5% of monetization. And then when we got deeper, as I was mentioning, we discovered that there was like a ton of money on the table. And that brought me to the second pivotal moment. That was in 2016. The verticalization happened between 15 and 16. And then in 16, we did the first home equity loan. And we looked at the amount of money that we could extract from it. And that was life-changing. And I remember talking to Manuel and Anderson from Redpoint and telling them we're gonna throw to the garbage the marketplace and we're gonna be focusing on this. I remember Anderson looking at me and saying, "Are you sure? Are you sure that you want to compete against Itaú and the likes?" I say, "Yeah." I said, "Well, tweet in a way that you don't get destroyed in the middle." Yeah, and in reality, the transition was quite smooth. But it was tough. It was moving from partnering with banks to competing head to head to banks, and that was 2016. Yeah, third pivotal moment, 2019. I'm talking only about the good ones. We can talk about bad ones, but the bad ones are the ones that continuously happen all the time, and then suddenly you emerge from the ashes. Yeah, the third one was 2019, and that was a fundraising event. That was SoftBank, the Series D, $230 million. It was pivotal because it was an amount of money that we had never imagined that we could have, and it helped you in really gaining escape velocity with Creditas. We wouldn't be today a $400 million revenue company without those funds being put into the company. It changed the space as well because suddenly a ton of competition coming from every single space. Yeah, because everyone could dump like $100 million into a business. So 2019, 2020, 2021, it was a battle for survival with a lot of cash. Because everyone was competing against you and you had to defend, you had to attack. Those Game of Thrones years, I wouldn't recommend to anyone to go through them again because probably you were destroying more value than generating, but you had to survive those phases somehow. And then the latest one, 2022, that was the peak of the burn of Creditas. We were burning $3 million per day. Not bad. Yeah,
It's a good day.
Yeah, $3 million per day. And I imagine that some bad days we were burning more than that, but let's say on average it was 3 million. And in retrospect, that didn't make like any sense. At the same time, that burn allowed us to learn 10 times faster. Otherwise, we would be 1/3 of the size if we hadn't done that. But that pivotal moment, we had just raised the Series F, led by Fidelity. That was $250 million. And you were seeing that that dynamic of the market was going to finish. And you had to reshape your future. And for us, the problem was that the margins were extremely low at that point. The pricing was very low. We wanted to use the price as a marketing tool. And it was being a very ineffective way of acquiring customers. So we designed a plan. And I think it's the only time probably in the life of Creditas in 12 years that a plan has actually happened in the same time frame that we had to. And it was because it was mandatory. Otherwise, we were dying. So we designed a plan to break even the company in 18 months. It ended up being in 20 instead of 18. But it was all about repricing the portfolio and making sure that customers were not flying away from you. And what we realized was that our product was much more sticky than we thought. We realized the competition was much worse than what we expected. We thought they were better from that perspective. They were pushing the prices higher as well. So suddenly we managed to, at the same time, significantly increase margins 3 times and reduce customer acquisition costs. We cut it by half. So the combination of both factors, it brought you to Creditas today. We broke even in December 23. And then since then, it has been moving the company into higher growth. But now you want to do it in a much more capital efficient way. You don't want to raise funds again. You just want to be completely independent. And I think those are the ones.
Amazing. And in the middle of that, there was something that is far from trivial, which is a solo founder going from being the founder of a no revenue startup to becoming the CEO and founder of a $400 million annual revenue powerhouse for 12 years. And how was Sergio in the middle of this? I mean, in the day-to-day, it may seem obvious that the founder and the original founder and the original CEO stay all the time. But going back, it is not exactly easy. The toolkit changes every now and then. The environment changes, like you mentioned. The demand of the investors and the employees and of the suppliers and clients. How has Sergio evolved this?
Yeah, I think that very very transformational. I think that the reason why I'm so passionate about what we are doing as well outside of Creditas with Endeavor is because I've realized that the power of entrepreneurship, it goes beyond building businesses. It's about transforming lives and people, individuals, and understanding that there's no ceiling on what we do, and in reality, most of the time we place our own ceilings, and that happens all the time. When you are working on the corporate world, you feel that the ceiling is defined by someone that you are reporting to and so on. And then suddenly when you don't have like anyone reporting to you, then you ask yourself, why am I not doing X or Y? And then suddenly you answer yourself, it's because I don't want, because if I want, I can do that. I think that the 2012, 13, 14 phase, it was extremely challenging. A lot of sleepless nights. Before starting the conversation, Gustavo, I was telling you that I'm not going to be a serial entrepreneur. I'm a serious entrepreneur just once, because it's so painful, those early days, so painful. But I think that they created a different type of character that takes life easier, if you want, sees the problems with a different perspective. After having so many wrong roads taken, so many bad decisions, and then still surviving through that, it gives you the peace of mind of, look, let's try, and if not, we will fix it. And that was, in retrospect, it was mind-blowing. Then the openness of the personality. In the corporate world, you still feel that the brand is what guides you, and in the entrepreneurial side, it's you. And then you need to find yourself. You need to be a more kind person with everyone, because the moment that you're not a kind person with someone, that someone will come back to you eventually, and those things are not nice. So I think that it feels to me I became a nicer person. Then through that journey, obviously I ended up by building a family that I feel so much in love with. And so when we were closing the Series A with Redpoint, my first daughter was being born. And in retrospect, I was like, well, that was crazy. I mean, I was like building a company, and then suddenly my first kid being born. And then you need to start like making those choices between the company or diapers. And it ended up being diapers and the company. Yeah. So you realize that you can really fit things into the glass until it's full. And then suddenly you realize that the glass, you can fit many more things than the one that you thought. If you place the things inside of the glass in the right order, with the right framing. And that brings me to something that has become a glue for me, which is health and sports. I think that before becoming an entrepreneur, I was already like a relatively sporty person, but after becoming an entrepreneur, it's essential. Yeah, the moments in those 12 years where I have not taken care of myself, and taking care of myself is like doing my 1 hour of sports every single day. I'm a runner. I love running. I need to run every single day. Otherwise, I feel different. That became a glue to make sure that I can have a peace of mind, clean my shit, and then say, I have my family, I have my friends, I have my company, and I need still to take care of my health. There are like so many entrepreneurs in this generation that have struggled on the personal side, on the psychological side, because they were not taking care of themselves and taking care of the brain. It's astonishing. And people that we thought that they were invincible, and then suddenly you discover that they have like a burnout and they had to leave the company. And typically people say, no, but that's because the company was not going in the right direction. It's true. But most of us always have those moments in which we are not going in the right direction. And the companies, there's one thing that we repeat all the time at Creditas: the companies don't die because they don't have money. They die because they don't have energy. Yeah. And that energy, obviously, the entrepreneur is the one that guides all that energy. Is the cheerleader of everything. The moment that entrepreneur gets out of shape, that like getting tired and so on, that's the moment that you break the company. You make it or break it in those moments. Everything else is just peacetime. When you have energy, when you're great, that's peacetime. Everything is going to work well. The moment that you're doubting yourself, that's when you make it or break it. And that's for us, for example, was pivotal moment in 2022, that reshaping of a structure that already had thousands of employees. You could break it. You could break it. And as a founder, sometimes it's even easier to say, just look, I have like a 20% of the business or 10% of the business or 30% of the business. It's not mine anymore. Should I dump the business? And then you start like thinking, who am I? What do I want to build in life? What do I want to feel proud about? What's my legacy? What do I want to do next? And then you need to find your energy in those moments. In 2022, that was the moment that I was in worst shape from a health perspective ever. And then I made a commitment and completely reshaped myself again. It was like a 1 year time frame that I was not in good shape. And really I found like the energy of making sure that everything was flying properly. Yeah.
And then you ran half of Morocco. 1 year after your worst shape. That was it.
They say that it's not about the destination, it's about the journey. And Morocco is an example of that. So we assembled a team of 8 entrepreneurs and investors. And I convinced everyone somehow to run together with me and do the Marathon des Sables, which is 252 kilometers in the desert, carrying your stuff and at close to 50 degrees. And it was an amazing experience. And an experience that since you're running alone so much time, you think a lot about many, many things about what encourages you, what motivates you, what your future is going to look like. Those moments are very relevant. Some people find comfort in religion, some in science, and you need to find your moments of rediscovering yourself and getting the stamina so that you can go back and keep on working.
So one question that I had was, how do you do so many things without having a burnout? And probably the answer now is because you do so many things that you don't have a burnout. But I'm talking about legacy. Would you tell us a little about Endeavor? I mean, it's a big part of your history and about Endeavor history in Brazil as well. You're very connected there.
I met Endeavor in 2013. Yeah, so I became part of the scale-up program. Early stage companies were joining at that point, and you were going through some mentorships. Fell in love with what they were doing. Became an entrepreneur Endeavor in 2017. It took me like 5 years at the end of the day because the company had to grow. And then I joined the board in 2019. Become a chairman of the board of Endeavor in Brazil in 2023. I supported in Endeavor the creation of the venture capital fund in Brazil, the Scale Up Endeavors 1 and 2. So we raised 2 funds to support the ecosystem. I think that the most important thing that you realize with people like Endeavor is that you need to build those networks, those connections, to build that serendipity. It's the ecosystem gets more mature when you have the safety net that Endeavor provides you, and the peace of mind that you can go in front of another entrepreneur and say, dude, my life is shit. How do I fix it? What are you doing? Or my company is collapsing. I have this problem with my board. I need to fire this co-founder. I need to fire this employee. And somehow in Endeavor, we have found a way of building trust across the network. And it's less about technical knowledge. It's about a hug from a fellow entrepreneur and go through the details of your problem with someone. And then suddenly you realize that everyone has the same type of problems. It comes to people all the time.
A network of peers, right?
It's a network of peers. But the power of building that network of peers with trust and with and making sure that we are on a mission. And I think that we are on a mission of making entrepreneurship the trampoline for growth in Brazil. It's very relevant because then you find a common mission, something that joins you, a glue. And it's not about fighting the incumbent. It's about fighting stupidity. It's about fighting bureaucracy. It's about fighting inefficiency. It's about fighting all the bad things and trying to build companies that create not wealth but well-being. It's about creating that richness of society and this belief that that there's a path for everyone to become a better person, better human, and so on. Yeah, very passionate about what we are doing in Endeavor, and hopefully one of the things that organizations like Endeavor, that in Brazil we have made it to 25 years now. It's a huge brand in Endeavor. It's the largest office in the world. One of the difficulties now for me as a board member is how can we reshape the future of Endeavor in Brazil? What's next? What are going to be the problems of our generation of entrepreneurs, and how can we help them in navigating through those problems? And Endeavor Spain, by the way, since we are talking with the Spaniards, has done. I mean, Adrian and Antonio, very, very good friends. They were part of the New York community. Antonio was in BCG before, also with me. They have done an amazing job on building something from scratch in just 10 years. The brand of Endeavor in Spain today is huge in the country, and still many things to do. So actually tomorrow I'm going to be leaving together with Endeavor Spain community. We're going to go to ski together. And at the end of the day, it's just finding excuses to build the bonds.
Sergio, you were talking about you're now, as a board member, you're thinking about the future of Endeavor and the future and the challenges ahead for entrepreneurs. Do you have any hypothesis there? Anything that you're thinking about?
Yeah. So the Endeavor until now has been much more about supporting the entrepreneur with the business. And it feels to us that it needs to go beyond that. Entrepreneurs today are more than business managers. Obviously, the business is a very, very relevant part of the entrepreneur, but we are individuals that have an ecosystem, a bubble that we call in Endeavor around ourselves. In my case, obviously I have Endeavor, but I co-founded a venture capital fund in fintech together with Bank, which is called Active Fintech. I support the K Fund, you guys, which you're doing an amazing job. You there also in expanding to Latin America, so hopefully I can help you there. But what I'm referring to here is that we entrepreneurs, you like it or not, but we inspire other people. Employees that come through Creditas, our companies, and then they end up like funding other companies and expanding the ecosystem. And Endeavor can support us in doing that better, getting benefit from that better, and preparing for the next steps. In some cases, I mean, I hope to live forever, but I don't think that it's going to happen. But eventually, I've made a recommitment with Creditas, because at a certain point 2 years ago, I was thinking, am I going to be the CEO forever? And look, I don't know if it's going to be forever or not, but I'm now 100% commitment to be the CEO of Creditas for the foreseeable future. Yeah. And that could take 10, 20, 30 years. I don't know. I'm 47, but I feel younger than ever. And but obviously there are like many things that happen in so many decades of a life. And we feel that Endeavor can and should be supporting us in that very long journey that now we have ahead of us.
Amazing. And before the last two closing questions, I mean, you touched on the topic of the VC firm, and you also mentioned before that your first angel check was on a pick, which for a first check, it was probably a very good one. Hope the following are like that. Tell us a bit about the investment side of things. I mean, what are you looking for? What are you interested in these days? Why go into venture / angel? Is it all about giving back, or is there more to it?
So the reason why I invest is because I love entrepreneurs, and I love being in contact with that young generation and trying to figure out how to solve the problems that they have. It's a mental exercise. I think that when you get older, you need to find excuses to make your brain go faster. And you cannot be 24 hours thinking about your own problems, your own business. It's just not going to happen. You run into exhaustion. But then when you start trying to support other companies in solving them problems, then something amazing happens, which is you reflect on the problem of somebody else and then you bring it into your territory later. You discover something that someone is doing and then clicks your brain, and then you go back to your room and say, it's extremely, extremely productive. So that's the reason why I invest. What I look into, it depends on the stage. So when I'm investing in early stage, it's about the founder and the market, if I'm attracted to or not. Obviously, I'm very attracted to financial services ideas. I would love to invest in early stage companies focusing on healthcare. Agriculture is something that I'm also very excited about. I think that the nutrition and better food for everyone, there are tremendous innovation that are going to come over the years. When I talk about health, I'm talking biotech, I'm talking genetics, a lot of things that are going to be innovating there. So being close to that is something that I'm very interested on. When I think in late stage, I look about real businesses, not the overnight success, the business that can be compounders. If you think about Creditas, it's the story that we are trying to build. This is not about what's the newest technology I want to get into it. I think that's very hard. That's more a Silicon Valley approach, and I don't think that I'm so smart. I'm looking more for compounders. So companies that I can see very clearly a huge market and that they have a competitive advantage and that it can compound. Something that you don't need to sell every single day, that you can compound on sales, and those sales attract more sales. And obviously lending is a very clear example on that, and financial services in general. I love insurance due to the cash flow structure of it, and because I'm very familiar to actuarial calculations and the likes. Very excited about a number of things. I would have loved to have found a new company, the newest company investing in AI, but I've already confessed that it's not going to happen. I'm not going to be the AI investor. I'm going to be more on the type of investor that invests in companies that use AI in the best way to maximize the value on the business model that they are trying to apply. But after yesterday's market collapse with DeepSeek and all the repercussions of that, trying to pay a lot of attention and getting to know what the repercussions are going to be.
Meanwhile, Creditas is a fantastic compounder, and I mean, you're more than congratulations for that. You mentioned you're back in Spain, living in Madrid, and we talked a lot about Brazil and Creditas, but now, how do you see Spain and Europe looking from now? What's missing? What's there in the ecosystem? What excites you?
Well, the first thing is I have been out of Spain for 17 years. So that was, I left when the savings banks were going to start collapsing one after the other. Probably I was responsible for a bit of that. And today, what I see is an amazing ecosystem. It's astonishing what has happened in Spain, specifically on the entrepreneurial side. A lot of appetite from young people on becoming entrepreneurs. Getting to know the community. Very excited about starting investing in Spain. Feel very proud about what everyone is working on. Looking for opportunities for Creditas. I think that at the end of the day, the reason why I also moved to Spain was besides the family, more importantly, we feel that there's going to be the next 10 years of Creditas are not going to be exactly the same as the last 10 years. And one of the things that we are doing here, for example, is we issued the first European bond in Sweden, and that was $80 million, close to $100 million. And there's more future for that. So Europe has a lot of attractive opportunities to explore, and I want to make sure that I'm closer to that. I think that Europe needs to, obviously, if you think from a global perspective, Latin America has amazing opportunities, but everything is happening today in the US and China. I'm simplifying, obviously. Europe needs to find its way. And it cannot be that we have so much bureaucracy, so much regulation, so many of those things. That's probably the negative of Europe. And somehow entrepreneurship gets deterred by that type of roadblocks. If we find a cohort of entrepreneurs that are not afraid of taking risks and trying to think big, then I think that Europe will be back in shape. But even though the ecosystem has significantly improved, Europe is not in amazing shape when you compare it to what has happened in the US and China. And we deserve a country and a region, a continent with high growth. And the only people that can actually make it happen are entrepreneurs. There's not going to be any corporation doing that. There's not going to be any government doing that. It needs to be entrepreneurs. And entrepreneurs require capital. And really, that's the second part of the equation. This is a marketplace. Entrepreneurs on one side, investors on the other. So really looking forward to this next decade in Europe. Hopefully, I can contribute to try to find solutions to problems more than anything else. But I don't like the idea of, in Europe, we don't have the benefits of this or that. I think that we need to find our own competitive advantage and fight for them. Because there's like hundreds of millions of very smart people that deserve a better society.
Totally. Sergio, last two closing questions. Can you recommend us a book or some other form of content? And can you also suggest someone to bring to the podcast that hasn't been on before?
Oh, I just read this book. Very exciting. The Age of Scientific Wellness. It's written by two guys that co-founded a company many years ago. That had like it was like a group of 5,000 patients where they did a longitudinal phenotyping analysis, which is essentially monitoring from your genetics down to what you do with those genetics, your environment, how do you take care of yourself, and so on, to try to find correlations between biomarkers and early detectors into the future illness. Extremely data-driven. You were reading the book, and this is an amazing company. It's like the way that we manage companies as startups. It's like creating KPIs, and that's your health. And there's this concept of, if you are the CEO of a business and take so seriously your business, professionalizing it, taking care of every single metric, looking at it as if it was your life, why don't you do the same with your health? And it's about defending that health needs to be personalized, it needs to be oriented to metrics, but it needs to be participative. So we as individuals need to participate on our own health, and need to learn, discover, and so on. So, recommend it a lot.
And someone to invite to the podcast? Any suggestions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would invite Antonio Iglesias from Endeavor. And I think it's for two reasons. I think you have not invited him yet, right?
No, he hasn't been on before. Yeah.
Okay. So two reasons. One is his experience with Endeavor. I think that he can talk a lot about what Endeavor has done for the community, what the future looks like, and so on. And then second, because he has, and I have like another book around here. Let me see. Jesus Christ, I don't see it now. He is dedicating some decent amount of time of thinking about the future of the world on something that is difficult to build a business plan, but that it's about a reflection about how energy consumption increases over time, and that really you're going to be reaching a maximum of growth because you are running out of resources. And even if you become more efficient with the resources management, the human being wants more energy and more energy and more energy. And until today, the only really scalable source of energy is unfortunately not infinite, and which is fossil fuels. And that creates an obstacle for growth. And Antonio will elaborate a lot on that and be an amazing partner.
We'll invite him. Sergio, thanks a ton for your time. This has been great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sergio.